27,000 feet above Germany, July 30th, 40. Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth can't breathe. His oxygen line is shattered. Blood soaks through his flight jacket from the shrapnel in his shoulder. One of his twin .50 caliber machine guns is jammed, and there are still 3 Messerschmitt fighters coming straight at him. His vision tunnels, the edges going dark. He has maybe 90 seconds before he passes out, maybe less. But here's what those German pilots don't know. This wounded 23-year-old from Massachusetts, this high school dropout who weighs 138 pounds, has already killed 3 of their brothers this morning. And before this day is over, before his blood-soaked body is carried out of this aircraft, he will do something that changes the way America fights in the sky. Something the expert said was impossible. My name is host name. What I'm about to tell you is the true story of a man who saved hundreds of American lives by breaking every rule in the book. A man whose name you've probably never heard. The deadliest aerial gunner in American history. This is the story of Michael Arooth, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand what happened at 27,000 feet that day, you need to know where this story really begins. Not in the sky over Germany, but in a cramped apartment in Springfield, Massachusetts, where a Lebanese immigrant family was doing everything they could just to survive. Michael Lewis Arooth was born July 31st, 1990. His father, Salem, worked brutal shifts at a textile mill. His mother, Dora, took in laundry from wealthier families, scrubbing other people's clothes late into the night by dim lamplight while young Michael tried to sleep. They were immigrants. They were poor. They were invisible. The kind of family that Depression-era America forgot about. Michael wasn't a good student. He tried. But sitting in a classroom at Springfield Technical High School, learning mathematics and history, felt pointless when he could hear his mother coughing in the next room from exhaustion, when he could see his father's hands permanently stained from textile dyes, shaking from fatigue at the dinner table. So after 3 years, Michael Arooth walked out of school and never went back. He was 17 years old. He got work as a chauffeur, not glamorous work, but honest. And it taught him something the classroom never could. When something needs doing, you don't wait for someone to tell you how. You figure it out yourself. That instinct, that refusal to accept the official answer when his eyes told him something different, would later save his life and hundreds of others. But in 1942, Michael Arooth wasn't thinking about saving lives. He was thinking about eating regularly. On August 25th, 3 months after his 23rd birthday, he walked into the Army recruiting station in Springfield. The recruiter looked at this skinny kid and saw cannon fodder. Michael saw 3 meals a day and a paycheck. Neither of them imagined that within a year, this unremarkable young man would become the most effective killer in the United States Army Air Forces. Let me tell you what he was walking into. Because in 1943, American bomber crews over Europe were dying in numbers that would make your blood run cold. The week of October 8th through 14th, 1943. 7 days that became known as Black Week. The 8th Air Force lost 148 heavy bombers. That's not just machines. That's 1,500 men. Sons, fathers, brothers, husbands, killed, wounded, or captured in 1 week. The loss rate was 13% per mission. Think about that. 1 in 8 bombers that took off didn't come home. At that rate, the entire bomber force would cease to exist within months. And here's what makes it even worse. The American gunners were barely hitting anything. Intelligence analysts discovered that for every 100 rounds fired at attacking German fighters, fewer than 2 actually struck the target. Less than 2%. These boys were trained. They were brave. They were firing thousands upon thousands of rounds, and they were dying anyway. The experts had a solution. They always do. Fire at 400 to 600 yards using standard deflection shooting principles. Follow the training, trust the doctrine. The problem was that the doctrine was getting everyone killed. The Army sent Michael Arooth through their training pipeline, gunnery school at Fort Myers, Florida. They taught him to strip a .50 caliber Browning blindfolded. They taught him deflection angles. They taught him to fire at 400 to 600 yards. And Arooth listened. He nodded. He passed his tests. But something bothered him about the math. These instructors spoke with such confidence about optimal ranges and hit probabilities, but none of them had ever been shot at. None of them had watched their friends burn alive at 27,000 feet. Arooth kept his doubts to himself. By June 1943, Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth found himself in England, assigned as tail gunner on Tondelayo in the 39th Bombardment Group. Tail gunner, the loneliest position on the bomber. You sit by yourself in a plexiglass bubble at the aircraft's rear, facing backward, watching the world recede. When German fighters attack from behind, and they usually do, you're the last line of defense. You're also the most likely to die. His first combat missions in June and July, Arooth did exactly what they taught him. Waited for 600 yards, calculated deflection, fired controlled bursts, watched his tracers miss, watched other bombers explode, watched them spin toward Earth, trailing fire, watched parachutes blossom when there was time. When there wasn't, and there usually wasn't, he watched men die. And Michael Arooth started to think. The moment came not in combat, but on the ground. He was cleaning his guns in the maintenance hangar, running patches through the barrels. The repetitive work that keeps your hands busy while your mind wanders. And a thought occurred to him. Simple, almost childish in its directness. What if they're wrong? What if everything they taught us is killing us? He thought it through. The manual says fire at 600 yards. That's where you have the best chance of hitting. But Arooth had noticed something. By the time a Messerschmitt reaches 600 yards, it's already in firing range. The German pilot has already been shooting at you. Your bomber absorbs damage before you even pull the trigger. But what if you flip that? What if you start shooting at 900 yards before the German expects it, before he's locked onto his target? You probably won't hit him, but you'll disrupt him. Force him to react instead of attack. It was heresy. It violated every principle of aerial gunnery. The textbook said it was wasteful, ineffective, amateur. But the textbook was written by men who'd never been in combat. Arooth decided to try it anyway. Mid-July, mission to Hanover. When the German fighters appeared, Arooth started shooting at 800 yards, sometimes 900, long bursts instead of controlled pairs. His fellow gunners thought he'd lost his mind. Arooth's wasting ammo, someone muttered over the intercom. But something remarkable happened. The German fighters broke off sooner, attacked less aggressively. Tondelayo took less damage. Arooth knew he was onto something, but he needed to be certain. He needed to see if it would work when everything went to hell. July 30th, 1943. Target, Kassel, Germany. Deep in enemy territory, the briefing made it clear. Expect heavy resistance. As they climbed to altitude, Arooth settled into his tail position. 40 degrees below zero, even with heated gear, through the plexiglass he watched England fall away. Then the Channel. Then occupied Europe, enemy territory. The flak started over Germany. Black puffs of exploding shells, each one capable of tearing an aircraft apart. Then Arooth saw them, fighter contrails forming up behind the bomber stream. He counted 8, 10, 15 Messerschmitts arranging themselves like wolves. "Tail gunner, you see them?" Lieutenant Brink, the pilot. "I see them, sir." The Messerschmitts came in fast. Arooth opened fire at 900 yards. The first fighter jinked hard, breaking off. The second pressed its attack, but was forced off at 700 yards, aim disrupted. The third pilot was braver or stupider. He held his approach. Arooth's tracers walked right into him. The Messerschmitt's canopy shattered. Smoke poured from the engine. The fighter rolled inverted and fell away, streaming fire. "Tail to crude, I got him. Good shooting. Stay sharp." The Germans regrouped, came at the formation from multiple angles. The sky filled with tracers and cannon shells. A beast 200 yards away took a direct hit and simply exploded. 10 men, gone. Just gone. Arooth kept firing. Another Messerschmitt came at him from 7 o'clock low. Arooth started firing at 850 yards. The German held his course, but Arooth's continuous fire forced him into an evasive weave. The fighter's aim was ruined. As it pulled away, Arooth's tracers found it. The tail section disintegrated. The aircraft spun toward Earth. Number 2. Then everything went wrong. A 20-millimeter cannon shell smashed into the tail section. The impact like being inside a drum when someone hits it with a sledgehammer. Arooth felt something punch his shoulder. Hot, burning. He looked down. Blood spreading across his flight jacket. Another shell struck. The oxygen line shattered. The hiss of escaping oxygen loud even over the wind and engines. Without oxygen at 27,000 feet, you have minutes before you pass out. His vision started narrowing, edges going gray, thoughts turning thick and slow. He knew what was happening. Noxia, the silent killer. And more fighters were coming. Another shell. One of his guns jammed. The bolt mechanism warped from impact. One working gun, no oxygen, wounded, and 3 Messerschmitts setting up for another attack. The manual said, report the malfunction. Conserve strength. Don't make the oxygen deprivation worse. Arooth ignored it. He'd been ignoring the manual all day. With fingers that felt like frozen blocks inside his gloves, he reached for the jammed gun. The manual said it couldn't be fixed in flight. The manual said it required an armorer. The manual had never met a kid from Massachusetts who grew up making do. Arooth hammered the mechanism with his fist. Once, twice. He could barely feel his hands. His vision definitely narrowing now. Dark spots dancing. Third blow, something shifted. The bolt unseized. Rounds feeding again. The Messerschmitts were at 800 yards. Closing. Arooth's oxygen-starved brain couldn't calculate deflection anymore. So he didn't try. He put the crosshairs on the lead fighter and fired. Both guns, long bursts. The Messerschmitt walked into the stream of fire. Arooth watched, through vision that was now just a tunnel, as tracers sparkled along the wing route. The wing folded, the fighter tumbled. Number 3, the remaining fighters broke off. Tail to pilot. His voice sounded strange, slow, thick. I'm hit. Oxygen's out. Can't stay conscious. Hold on. We're almost through. The darkness rushing in. He could feel consciousness slipping. Then through the fog, one more Messerschmitt, a lone fighter determined to finish it. With the last of his strength, Arooth swung his guns. His vision just a pinprick. The darkness eating everything. He fired. The tracers arced out, beautiful, almost hypnotic, and converged on the Messerschmitt. The engine exploded. Orange fireball against blue sky number 4. Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth passed out. He came to as Tondelayo crossed into friendly airspace. Someone had dragged him forward, put an emergency oxygen bottle on his face. His shoulder felt like someone had driven a spike through it. Welcome back. You gave us a scare, but I watched you nail 4 German fighters. 4 in one mission. When Tondelayo landed, the tail section looked like Swiss cheese. Over 50 holes. They had to help Arooth out. He could barely walk. The medics took him straight to the hospital, dug metal fragments from his shoulder, treated him for oxygen deprivation and blood loss. Then the intelligence officers came to debrief the crew. 4, the senior officer said, skepticism clear. In one mission? But the evidence was undeniable. Other crews corroborated. Gun camera footage showed impacts. Arooth's ammunition expenditure told its own story. He'd fired nearly twice regulation amounts. The report went up with a recommendation. Distinguished Service Cross. But when the gunnery instructors at Training Command heard about Arooth's technique, they were horrified. Opening fire at 900 yards? Long bursts? This violated every principle. A heated debate erupted at headquarters. Training specialists said Arooth's success was dumb luck. That if everyone wasted ammunition like this, they'd run out of rounds before running out of Germans. But operational commanders fought back. They pointed to loss rates, to crews not coming home, to evidence that standard doctrine wasn't working. "With respect, sir," one lieutenant colonel said, voice tight with anger. "If Sergeant Arooth can shoot down 4 fighters using his technique, and our average gunner shoots down 0 using yours, what exactly are we defending?" Major General Frederick Anderson had been a combat pilot in World War I. He understood that the best tactics came from men who survived, not men who designed courses. "Test it," he ordered. "Let the sergeant talk to our other gunners. Let's see if it works." Then he approved Arooth's Distinguished Service Cross. Word spread through the bomb group like wildfire. Other gunners asked Arooth about his technique. By mid-August, recovered from his wounds, he was flying again. This time, with an audience. The results were remarkable. Gunners who adopted early aggressive fire reported German fighters attacking more cautiously, breaking off sooner, less precise. Intelligence analysts correlated the data. Groups with aggressive gunners suffered 20 to 30% fewer losses. It wasn't magic, it was psychology. When defensive fire started earlier and continued aggressively, fighter pilots, like all humans, subconsciously pulled back. By October 1943, revised doctrine filtered through the 8th Air Force. The new guidance authorized extended range engagement when tactically appropriate. Bureaucratic language admitting the skinny kid from Massachusetts had been right and the experts wrong. Arooth kept flying. September 6th, mission to Stuttgart. He shot down 2 more Messerschmitts, but Tondelayo took severe damage. 2 engines failed. They weren't making it to England. Lieutenant Brink ditched in the channel. The Beeson hit water at 120 miles per hour, like hitting concrete. The aircraft broke apart, but the crew survived. British boats picked them up within 2 hours. Arooth was flying again within a week. By early 1944, his official tally stood at 17 enemy aircraft destroyed, the highest confirmed score of any American bomber gunner in the entire war. 17. Most gunners never scored a single kill. The average was 0. Michael Arooth destroyed 17. The Army wanted to make him an instructor, wanted to publicize his record, make him the face of aerial gunnery. Arooth declined. He'd done his part. By 1944, fighter escorts had neutralized the German threat anyway. The brutal days were over. The lessons he learned, paid for in blood, had been absorbed into training. New gunners learned aggressive defensive fire as standard, never knowing it was invented by a high school dropout who trusted his eyes over textbooks. Michael Arooth returned to Springfield in 1944. He married, raised a family, went back to work, never spoke about the war. His children knew their father had been a gunner, had medals. But he didn't elaborate. The Distinguished Service Cross stayed in a drawer. So did the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, Purple Heart. All the hardware that meant he'd been places and done things he'd rather forget. In 1958, he was selected as honorary pallbearer for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier ceremony, recognition of his status as America's highest-scoring aerial gunner. He attended because it was an honor, because it wasn't about him. It was about all of them. But his legacy lived on. The principle he discovered, that aggressive early engagement disrupts enemy tactics even without hits, became fundamental to aerial defense. When B-twin-ends entered service in the Pacific, gunners trained on principles owing much to Arooth's experience. In the jet age, the concept that defensive systems should engage threats at maximum range became standard. Modern air defense systems, Aegis shields, Patriot batteries embody the same principle: engage early, engage aggressively, force the attacker to react. Post-war studies vindicated Arooth completely. Bomber formations with aggressive gunners suffered significantly fewer losses. The study concluded the psychological effect of early defensive fire significantly impacts enemy attack effectiveness independent of hit probability. Running the numbers conservatively, if improved gunnery tactics saved just 1% loss rate across 6 months, that's approximately 7 bombers. 750 men, 750 fathers, brothers, sons who came home instead of dying over Germany. Because one man questioned the experts. As bomber gunners go, 17 confirmed victories remains an unbroken American record. No American gunner has matched it. Part circumstance. By late 1944, Allied air superiority was so complete that German fighters rarely challenged bombers. The window for gunner aces had closed. But it was more than luck. It was the courage to question authority, to trust his observations over doctrine, to break rules when rules were killing people. Michael Arooth died February 1990, age 70. His obituary mentioned his service and medals, but didn't explain what he'd accomplished. A few surviving veterans attended his funeral. They knew. Massachusetts Representative Richard Neal read a tribute into the congressional record, calling Arooth one of the forgotten heroes of the Second World War. forgotten by the public, but not by the men who served with him, not by the crews who adopted his tactics and lived, not by the 750 families whose sons came home because aggressive defensive gunnery reduced loss rates by just a few percentage points. Let me leave you with this. We think of heroism as one big moment, one act of incredible courage, and sometimes it is. July 30th, 1943, was that for Michael Arooth. Fighting wounded, without oxygen, with damaged equipment, destroying 4 enemy fighters. But the real heroism was quieter. A young man willing to question experts, willing to trust what he saw over what he was told, willing to experiment when the old approach failed. The courage to be right when everyone said you were wrong. The Army had thousands of trained instructors, men with degrees in ballistics and mathematics, men who wrote detailed manuals, men who'd never heard a shot fired in anger. And one skinny kid from Massachusetts with 3 years of high school figured out what all of them missed. Sometimes the point of shooting isn't hitting the target. Sometimes it's making the other guy miss you. That insight, paid for in blood at 27,000 feet over Germany, changed how America fought. Then Michael Arooth came home, put his medals in a drawer, and never asked for recognition. He just did the job. The next time someone tells you the only way is the way it's always been done, remember Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth. Remember that sometimes the greatest innovations come from people closest to the problem. Sometimes the best tactics come from soldiers in trenches, not generals in headquarters. And sometimes the skinny kid who dropped out of high school sees what all the experts missed. 17 enemy aircraft destroyed, 750 lives saved. One man who rewrote the rules and never talked about it. That's Michael Arooth, the deadliest tail gunner in American history. The man who proved the experts wrong, the forgotten ace. If this story moved you, share it. Let's make sure Michael Arooth's name isn't forgotten. Let's make sure a new generation knows what these men did. Heroes aren't always the ones with the most medals or biggest monuments. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who did extraordinary things and went back to ordinary lives. Sometimes they're the ones history almost forgot. But we won't let that happen. Not today, not to Michael Arooth.